AI agents are set to dramatically transform our lives soon, and we are only at the very beginning of their potential, which makes now the perfect time to dive into this technology that is emerging quickly while it's still in what I think, its infancy. My name is Mahmoud, and I'm a senior software engineer who made the bold decision to leave a secure career to fully immerse myself in AI technology. My goal is to eventually launch my very own AI agency, which is why I created this channel. There are approximately 360 million companies worldwide that will soon need to integrate AI agents into their business workflows one way or another, or simply just risk falling behind. And I also understand that there are already companies implementing agents into their workflows in various ways for things such as customer support automation and lead generation and so on. However, the number of use cases that can be reliably handled by these agents at the moment is relatively really small compared to what it will actually be able to do in the very near future. And this actually creates a huge opportunity for us to provide agentic solutions to those soon to emerge use cases. All right, look, the truth is more than 99% of the population is just not even going to hear about this revolution that's unfolding quickly right before their eyes. But even if they did, they just wouldn't be able to fully grasp its significance until it's too late, just like the early days of the internet. So honestly, you can already be proud of yourself for just clicking on this video, as I think it shows that at the very least you are a curious person, which I think is a really important quality for a person to have. So go ahead and pat yourself because you deserved it. But whether you're just curious or eager to become part of this revolution just like me, this video is the perfect entry point. The video is divided into two sections. In the first section, we'll conceptually explore what an AI agent is by breaking it down to the components that it is made up of, examining each one and how they work together to make it all possible, while also looking at two examples. In the second section, I'll build agents based on the two examples from section 1 using N8N, which is a super cool tool that lets us visually build these agents without requiring any programming knowledge. I'll walk you through the process step by step so you can follow along if you want to, and you'll also see the components from section 1 in action, which will further cement your understanding. And by the end of this video, not only will you understand what an AI agent is and how it works, but you will also have built two of your very own agents. So I would definitely recommend you to get yourself comfortable and make sure to watch this video until the end. And without further ado, let's get started. So what exactly is an AI agent? You can think of it like a smart assistant that has access to a bunch of tools like the ones you can see on the screen, and that understands what a task is. And when it's given one, it's able to autonomously decide on the steps that it should take in order to complete it. For instance, it can decide how many tools it should execute and in what order to execute them. Let's take a look at a very simple example here where we have a user requesting the agent to schedule a meeting in Google Calendar and then send a confirmation email via Gmail. We can see that the agent here decides to first schedule a meeting using the Google Calendar tool out of all these 5 tools in this case. And then after it's done with that, it goes ahead and sends a confirmation email with Gmail. The agent did this all by itself, completely autonomously, without any form of intervention. It just used its own reasoning by taking in the request and deciding on what steps to take in order to complete it. This is, by the way, just a very simple application of AI agents. We can have much more complex workflows where we have multiple agents working together, collaborating on trying to solve a particular problem or task. And now that we have a high level understanding of what AI agents are, let's start diving deeper. To make it easier to understand, I've decided to break down what an agent is into the components that it is made of. We have 4 main components, and we are going to be going through them one by one together, understanding what each of their roles are and how they work together to make this whole agent thing possible. Let's first start with LLM. LLM basically stands for large language model. It's ChatGPT and the likes of it. It's used as the brain of the agent. It handles the cognitive process for things like planning the steps and the type of tools to call in order to complete a task. And without it, the agent would just not work. You can apply it to humans as well. If you remove the brain of a human, you know what would happen. Although interestingly, I do see some people alive without one, but yeah, that's a conversation for another topic. But anyway, this is basically what LLM is. Again, the brain of the agent. Now let's continue with the second component, which is the memory. It turns out that LLMs do not have the ability to form new memories, and it can only remember the things that it has been trained on. So for us to create the illusion that it does have a memory, what we'll have to do is we'll have to externally manage it by feeding it what we call a conversation history, which is what it refers to in order to track a conversation or a session. But let's take a look at an example where we don't do this, right? There's a user saying, "Hi, my name is John." The model responds with, "Hi, John, nice to meet you." But the second the user sends another message by following it up with, "What's my name?" the model this time responds with, "I don't know your name." Let's take a look at why this is the case and what's happening under the hood. So when John sends this request saying, "Hi, my name is John," what's really happening under the hood is, as I mentioned earlier, we are creating a message history and passing it to the LLM, right? This is what the LLM refers to keep track of the conversation. In this case, you can see there are two types of messages. The first one is the system message. You can think of the system message as a default message to give instructions to the LLM. In this case, we are saying that it is a helpful assistant. And the second message we can see here is a user message, which is obviously sent by John. It is the same exact message that we are sending here. And it is what we are actually sending to the LLM, right? So the LLM here refers to this message history and says, "Hi, John, nice to meet you." But the second John says, "What's my name?" without appending the previous messages here, so then the LLM just has nothing to refer to. And in this case, it just won't know his name. And hence why it will respond to him with, "I don't know your name." But if we did manage the memory, this is what would have happened. If in this case, John said, "What's my name?" after adding the context of the previous messages, the LLM would be able to refer to this history and see that his name is John, and would respond in this case with, "Your name is John." So yeah, this is what the memory component is all about, which is to handle the conversation history in order to provide an LLM with contextual awareness. So far, we have covered two of the components that makes up an agent. The first one being the LLM, which is the brain of the agent, and the second one is the memory, which we just covered. Now we're going to look into the third one, which is the tools component, and this is going to be really straightforward. So let's get right to it. All right, so it's super straightforward to understand what the tools component is, right? It's pretty much just giving the LLM, which is the brain of the agent, access to tools. But as simple as it is, it's also where agents truly shine. Because imagine if agents didn't have any access to tools. They would be confined within the space of the data that they have been pre-trained on, right? They wouldn't have any kind of access to the external world. So I wouldn't be able to tell it to send an email for me or check the current price of Bitcoin. But once you introduce tools, you immediately strip it out of this limitation. Now, suddenly you can tell it to send an email or check the current price of Bitcoin, and you're pretty much just limiting it to the tools that you provide it with. So this is why this component is super crucial. Now let's take a look at what we are able to do with what we have. At this point, we have our memory, we have our LLM, and now we have our tools, right? This example is from the one I showed at the beginning, where we're telling it to schedule a meeting in Google Calendar and send a confirmation email. So we have a user sending in a request, the agent receives it, and then it gets stored in the memory. And then based on the request, the agent decides which tools to call in order to complete the request, right? And you probably noticed that we haven't yet covered the fourth component, but we already have an agentic system here that works. And the truth is, in many cases, just having three of these components could be enough for you to have an effective agentic system. But now let's take a look at the next example. In this example, imagine that this is the second request that we are sending to the agent. The first one was telling it to return the latest email in our inbox, which is the one here on the top right. And we can see that the subject here is refund, and the content is about refunding something that was purchased 2 weeks ago, right? So then we tell him to respond to the email based on our company's policy. But then the agent responds with, "I don't know the policy," because it does not have access to domain specific knowledge. And this is where just having three of these components is not going to be enough, and where we will need to have the fourth component. So let's look at what that is. But before that, let's look at what we have covered. We have covered three of the components that makes up an agent. The first one is, again, the LLM, which is the brain of the agent. The memory, which is to give it the ability to remember the context of a conversation. And then the tools, obviously, to give it access to the external world. And the last one is going to be RAG. So without further ado, let's get into it. So RAG stands for Retrieval Augmented Generation. Don't let the name scare you. It's actually a pretty easy concept to understand. You can think of it just as a technique used to fetch relevant information from a knowledge store so that it can later be passed to an LLM for it to generate more accurate and contextual responses. So when we send a request to the agent telling it to respond to the email based on our company's policy, what the agent would do is it would forward it to a retriever. That retriever would use this request to query the knowledge store, and then the knowledge store would return the relevant information, which later is then passed to the LLM, which is the brain of our agent. And then we would have what we need, and that would solve our problem. So let's take a look at an example of how this would have played out if we had RAG implemented, right? So here we are sending the request again to the agent, telling it to respond to the email based on our company's policy. The agent receives it, forwards it to the RAG layer. The RAG layer basically works on querying the knowledge store with the request, returns the relevant information to the agent, and then the agent now can use this context to respond to the email as we told it to, right? And that's basically how RAG works. Now, before finishing off learning about this component, I would like to dive deeper into the process that's going on here because I find it fascinating and I'm sure you will too. So we have this knowledge store that we talked about. This knowledge store is actually made of something that's called a vector database. And this vector database is a lot different than the traditional databases that we are used to, in that the way they store data is by positioning them within a high dimensional plane based on their semantic meaning, just like this example diagram we can see here, where this space represents the high dimensional plane and each of the items here represents an entry of data. So we can tell that there are 9 entries here in this database or 9 records. Now notice how animals are being positioned close to each other, while also how the fruits gets positioned close to each other, right? But also notice this, how when I say I love eating apple, it semantically gets placed closer to the fruit apple just because we say we love eating it, right? But if instead I said I love using apple, what happens is it's gonna actually semantically connect it to Steve's Jobs apple instead of connecting it to the fruit apple, right? So that's how we can understand the power of this technology. It doesn't really care about the letters that's inside the word, but rather the semantic meaning that it holds. So if I were to query this database for Apple phone, it would actually return this data here instead of any of the data here. But if I had queried for fresh apple, then we'll be getting this data here instead. So that is how this retriever is able to get the relevant information from the vector database. Also, I excluded a step in the process for simplicity's sake, but if you're curious, it's called embedding, and it's actually pretty simple too. What it does is it converts the data into vector, which is basically the numerical representation of the data you are trying to store. And this data is actually stored in the vector database as vectors, not like the ones we see here, but the diagram here is just used to help us visualize it. All right, so we are finally done with learning all the 4 components. And again, to recap, they were the LLM, the brain of the agent, the memory to help it remember, and then the tools to give it superpowers, and finally RAG to help our agent have domain-specific knowledge. All right, now that we have an understanding of what an agent is and how it works under our belts, we can start with actually building the examples I showed you in this lesson together using a tool called N8N, which does not require any kind of tools. So without further ado, let's get started. All right, so we are finally at my favorite part of the video where I'm going to be showing you how to build the agents that we saw in the previous section. And as we are building these agents, we are also going to see the 4 components that we talked about in action. So it's going to be super cool. For this, I'm going to head over to N8N.io and I'm just going to head over and sign in. But I would recommend you to also follow along as I build them so that you can actually have hands-on experience with it. So if you decide to actually follow along, you can create an account by clicking on Get Started. But I'm going to head over and sign in first. I'll see you in. And once we're signed in, we'll be navigated to the overview page. At least this is where I've been navigated to. Otherwise, you can just head over to the sidebar here and click on this overview button. And then you'll be able to see the same page as I'm seeing right now. And now we're going to go ahead and create a workflow. We can either click on this plus sign for that or just go ahead and click on this create workflow, which is what I'm going to do. Once we do, we're going to be seeing this canvas here with a plus button right in the middle of the screen with a label that says add first step. And since we're going to be creating the first agent that we covered in the previous section, which is going to schedule a meeting in Google Calendar and send a confirmation email, we are going to go ahead and click on this plus sign button and type AI agent. Once we do that, we'll see this window here with 3 sections, the input section, the middle section, and the output section. The input section is basically the source of the input. It could be anything. In our case right now, we are using the chat trigger, which is automatically created when we create an AI agent without any kind of triggers. So anything we send here is going to be sent to this agent as the input, right? So that's pretty much what the input is, and we're going to be seeing it in action soon. The output is basically what the agent generates as a response. And in the middle here, this is where we configure the settings, right? In this case, you can see this agent drop down here. Here we can pick the agentic framework for our agent. In this case, we can start with the conversational agent. So I'll go ahead and do that. And the source for prompt again is going to be the connected chat trigger node, since as we are going to be getting the input from the message trigger that we just saw just now. And now we are done with this part. I'll just go ahead and close this window. So now we have our agent that is empty, right? It doesn't have a brain, doesn't have a memory, does not have any tools. So let's go ahead and add this one by one. We are going to start with the brain. So to do that, we'll have to go ahead and click on the chat model. And when we do that, we get displayed with a list of options, and I'll just go ahead and pick OpenAI. Once we do that, we're going to be seeing this window here, and to actually use this, we will have to connect our OpenAI account, and I already have this set up, as you can see, 3 times, but for the sake of this video, I'm actually going to go through setting it up one more time so that you guys can follow along. And as you can see, there is this thing here called docs. I'm just going to click on this hyperlink, and when we do that, we are going to be navigated to this website. And here I'm going to click on, you can find authentication information for this node here. This is where, what the heck is going on outside? Anyway, so once we head on to this page, you can see that we can, there is an option that says create an OpenAI account. You'll have to do this if you don't already have an OpenAI account. If you do, you can go all the way down and click on this hyperlink here that says open your API keys page. And once we're here, the only thing we'll have to do is click on create new secret key, which I'm going to do, YouTube key. All right. And then click on create. It's then going to generate an API key for you, which you'll need to copy. And then click on the credential to connect with again. And then click on create new credential and go ahead and paste the API key into this input field. And just save it, and you'll see that the connection is successful. Now we'll be able to use OpenAI's chat model in our N8N workflow, and we can now decide on the model we want to use within OpenAI. I am going to go with GPT-4o 2024, November 20th. Once we select that, we can now close this window, and we have our agent with a brain, but no memory and tools. And remember how we talked about without a memory, the agent would not be able to track a conversation, right? Let's actually test that out now. So I'll click on chat for this, and I would say, just like in the first example, hi, my name is John. And you can see that it's processing the request, and we get a response that says, hi, John, how can I assist you? And we can see to the right that we have the logs that's printed out by the agent to process this request, right? And here we only have OpenAI chat models log, and this is actually the system message for this agentic framework. You can see that it's pretty long here. It's instructing the LLM of what it's supposed to do and how it's supposed to respond. So now let's try to follow this up with what's my name, right? When we do that, what we're going to see is a response saying, I'm sorry, I don't know your name, right? Could you tell me what it is? The reason to this is simply, as we talked about it again in the previous section, is because it does not have a conversation history that it can refer from. And to fix that, we'll have to be giving it a memory, right? Thankfully, N8N makes it super easy for us to actually manage the memory for the agent, which we are going to be doing now in just a few clicks. To do this, we'll go ahead and click on this plus sign under memory. When we do that, we are going to again be displayed a list of options again. In this case, you'll just go with the window buffer memory. Apparently it's the easiest, and it's built into N8N. So like it says, no credentials required. I'm going to go ahead and click on this. And again, we can see another window here. The first option says session ID. This is basically the ID of a conversation history. Suppose we have 10 conversation histories saved. We want to make sure that we get the right conversation history, right? So we're going to be using the ID like the one below here in order to get the conversation history that we need. And here we have the context window length, which is set to 5. What this is going to do is basically retrieve 5 of the latest messages instead of the whole conversation history. I'll just keep it this way. And now I can just close the window. Let's now try to actually test this out again with the memory, right? I'm going to reset the session and say the same thing. Hi, my name is John. Oops, John. Okay. You can see that it's again processing, but also notice how now inside the logs, we can also see window buffery memory, buffery, that was funny, a section dedicated to window buffer memory, which is used to actually store the conversation for us, right? This is what the agent is now going to refer to when it wants to track a conversation. And so we get a response saying, "Hello, John, how can I assist you today?" I will just follow it up with, "What's my name?" And it's requesting again. And now you can see that finally it's actually able to remember our name this time. And what's happening here again is it has this whole conversation history here that it can refer to. So it's like, okay, this guy's name is John. So I'll just say your name is John here. And that is how we are able to give memory to our agent in just a few clicks, which is super powerful and convenient. All right, so now we have an agent who is able to have a conversation and who is also able to remember things, right? And in our first example, our agent was able to schedule a meeting in Google Calendar and send a confirmation email, right? So for that, let's actually connect to the Google Calendar tool. And to do that, we'll click on this plus sign under tool this time. And we're going to go ahead and type Google Calendar here, or just search for Google. I'm going to click on Google Calendar tool. Once we do that, you can see now we have a new window that we get. And here again, we'll have to connect our account, this time to our Google. So click on create new credential and just simply sign in with Google and you should be set. So I'm going to close this window, go down, tool description. What tool description is basically to describe to the agent what a particular tool is for. In this case, you can either set it automatically or manually. I'll just keep it as set automatically. And then we have resource. I'm just going to click on event since you're actually trying to create an event, right? And the operation here, go with create since you're again trying to create an event. And the calendar I'm going to pick from is holidays in Turkey, which is funny. But yeah, I'm going to go with this. Honestly, I have no idea what this is about. But anyway, I'm just going to go ahead and click on my Gmail. And then we can see this start and end parameter here, right? This is basically the start date and time of an event. And the one at the bottom is the end date and time of the event. And what's happening here is this field currently is using N8N's expression syntax. So when we set to this, what it does is it represents the current time. So whenever this tool is called to create an event, what this will do is it will take the time that this tool is being called at and then just basically paste it here as a parameter, right? And then the same thing for the end date, but it additionally does this. It gets the current time and adds an hour to it, right? You can see it says +1 and 1 hour. So this means that it's going to set an event at a particular time for an hour. In our case, this is not what we want because this is going to be dynamic, right? We should be able to tell the agent to set date and time for any time we want it to. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually use the similar expression that N8N provides. And we are going to use this $sign here and then say from AI. This basically says that I want this field here to be populated by the AI, and I'm going to name it. I'm going to call it start date. And then the start date time. Start date and time of the event. So what I'm doing here is I'm basically giving the key of this input parameter and I am giving it the description. So when I do this, what happens is when the agent reads about this tool, it can see that it has an input parameter called start date time and that it is actually used to specify the start date time of a particular event, right? So it will be able to understand the data that it has to pass to it. And we can do the exact same thing with the end date. And here instead, I'm just going to copy paste. And then I am going to say end date time. And for the description, I'm going to say again, the end date time of the event. Now we can actually be done with this, but obviously in a calendar event, you can add more information such as the description or the title, right? For that, we can actually go ahead and click on add field here. And when we do that, we will see a lot of options. And in our case, let's click on summary. This is actually going to be the title of the calendar event so that we don't just get an empty event, but one with actual title. And again, we want this to also be populated by the AI, right? So what I'm going to do here again, similarly, is instead of using a fixed field, I want to use an expression field. Once I click on the expression field, what I'm going to initiate the expression by adding two opening and closing curly brackets. And inside this, I'm going to again say from AI, because hey, I want this value to be populated by AI, right? Because I want it to be dynamic. So I am going to call this title of event, the title of the calendar event. All right. Once we have this, we are actually set for this tool here. So we can just go ahead and close this window. After that, we still obviously have to connect to the Gmail tool, right? Since we want to be sending a confirmation email after creating this event. So I'm just going to go ahead again, under tool, click on the plus button, and now I'm going to search for the Gmail tool. Once I do that, again, we're going to be displayed a window. This time, we're going to have to just go ahead and sign in with Google. And once we're done with that, again, we get this tool description, which is the same thing, describing to the agent what this tool is about. And then the resource here, we're going to be picking message, since we are actually going to be sending a message, an email. And the operation is going to be send. And the recipient here is going to be dynamic. So what we want to do here again is, hey, I want to get this from the AI, right? I want the AI to decide the recipient for me. So I'm going to say recipient, email recipient, and the description of this tool, I'm going to say the recipient of the email. And the subject is, again, I want this to be given by the AI. Hey, buddy, please pass me the subject. I'll call it subject, and the description is going to be the subject of the email. And the email type is basically how you want the email content to be presented. You can select HTML. In this case, I'm just going to make it simple. So I'm going to click on text, and the message is, again, let's click on expression, and then let's say, hey, buddy, I want you to fill in the message for me as well. I'm going to call this content, and then I'm going to say the content of the email. By the way, you probably notice how we always select the expression, but there's also this fixed section here, which is a fixed input. The difference between these two is that the fixed input actually is, like its name suggests, only gonna have fixed value, right? I cannot use expression in there or anything. Whatever I type here is just gonna be the value, and it's gonna be fixed. So even if I edit this here, it's not gonna actually work. But what we're going to be seeing in the email's content is just this as a text. So that is why we want to use expression. But in cases where you actually need a fixed value, then you can just use this fixed tab instead of using expression, right? But in our case, of course, we want this to be dynamic and populated by the AI. So we're going to be using expression, and this is the expression we're going to use. Once we have this done, we are actually set to try out our first example. So let's see what happens. I'm going to go ahead and close this window, and finally, let's try out the example. And for this, I'm going to reset the session once again. All right, let me actually set up the environment for this. Okay, checking the email inbox of my email account. Also, by the way, before we do anything, we'll have to change this agent framework to a tools agent, since now we want it to execute tools. All right, now let's first try to tell it to actually set a calendar event, right? For tomorrow, 5 p.m. Set a calendar event for tomorrow at 5 p.m. Let's see what happens. You see that the agent is starting to process it, and it decides to hit the calendar tool. And once it does, you can see that calendar events title scheduled event has been set for tomorrow at 5 p.m. So I'd expect to see an event set tomorrow at 5 p.m., right? Which is on 6th February. But when I click on it, what you can see is that I don't have any events here visible. Why is that? Let's check it out. When I told it to set a calendar event for tomorrow at 5 p.m., when we look at the process, the logs that's been printed out by the agent, you can see that when it passes the input parameters to the Google Calendar event, it actually passed in 2023 and not the actual date that we are in. And the reason to that is because it has no access to what the current time is now, right? And the date we see here is probably the cutoff date of this model, so it thinks that we are still in 2023. And by the way, notice how the input parameter that it passed in is the one we specified in our Google Calendar, right? See start date time, and title of event. If we would go and expand the Google Calendar window, we can see it being start date time, and title of event. But anyway, how can we fix this problem here where it does not have access to what time it is? It's pretty simple actually. We can just go ahead into the AI agent and pass it the information ourselves. I'll be doing this by clicking on add option, and I'm going to add an additional system message. We already talked about what a system message is in the previous section. It's basically a default system message given to the agent to give instructions. In this case, I'm going to say, again, I'm going to pick the expression tab, and I'm going to say the current time is, and I'm going to use N8N's built-in time function. So now the agent would actually be able to refer to the current time by looking at this. And the next time we tell it to schedule a meeting in Google Calendar, it's going to be able to accurately set the time of the event, right? So let's test it out. Event for tomorrow at 5 p.m. And let's see what happens this time. You can see that it's being processed again. The agent hits the Google Calendar app. And this time when we look at the Google Calendar tool, we can see that it successfully used the correct date and time to set the event for. So with this, let's check the result. We can see that we actually do have the time being set, right? Interesting. So the time is being set to 12 to 1 p.m. And the reason to this is because right now I'm in Turkey, but I think the settings of my workflow is still set to Malaysia because, yep, I was right. Okay. So there's a 5 hours difference between Turkey and Malaysia, and that is why when I told it to set for 5 p.m., it's set for 5 p.m. but in Malaysian time. So that is why my calendar is being set to 5 hours earlier in Turkey, right? I'll delete this event and go ahead and send the same message. Set a calendar event for tomorrow. I'll do that again. See what happens. All right. Now let's see if it's going to be successful. I'm going to refresh the calendar, and we can now see that it actually set it for the correct time, which is 5 to 6 p.m. tomorrow. And that means our Google Calendar tool is now working, which also means that we can finally recreate our first example from the previous section. So let's do just that. I'm going to reset the message here and tell our agent to schedule a business meeting for tomorrow at 7, actually for 2 days later at 7 p.m. for an hour and a half. Title it accordingly, and also send a confirmation email to John at Skool98@gmail.com. And now you can see that we have our prompt ready. Let's see what it does when we actually send this off to it. So let's do that. All right, you can see that the agent is actually executing the request. It hit the Google Calendar tool and then the Gmail tool. And we can see that the business meeting has been successfully scheduled for February 7th, 2025 from 7 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. with the title business meeting. Additionally, a confirmation email has been sent to John at oncecode98@gmail.com, which is perfect, which is what we need. Let's first check our Google Calendar for on the 7th, and we can see that it actually created a business meeting for 7 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. and it also sent an email to John, right, which in this case has this email. So let's go ahead and check his inbox. All right, so we did get the email here in the way that we want it. Dear John, February 7th, 7 p.m. till 8:30. And the only problem here I see is that our name here is a placeholder, and that is because the agent does not know our name. So let's just go ahead and fix that real quick. To do this, I'm going to go over to the agent, and just like how we pasted the current date and time, I'm going to also say my name is Mahmoud. Actually, I'm going to give my full name just so that I can maybe use it in other contexts, right? And make sure to use it in email signatures. Okay, now we have this done, and I'm going to go ahead and tell it to resend the email. Please resend the email. Please resend the email. Let's see what happens. So it's processing it, and it hit the Gmail tool, and let's see what happened. Confirmation email has been resent successfully to John at oncecode98@gmail.com. Let's see the outcome. All right, we can see that a new email has indeed arrived, and this time we can see the same email, and without even specifying it, directly in the chat to actually include our name, the agent was able to infer it from the system message, and you can see that this time it used my name instead of just a placeholder. All right, great. So that's basically the first example, and now we can start looking into the second example. And this example was about telling the agent to send a response to an email based on the data that we have in our knowledge base. Before we start with this, I will actually first have to send the email to myself to simulate the scenario. And then we'll have to actually update the tool by adding a new one where we can this time fetch the emails in our inbox. So for that, I'm going to go and create another Gmail tool. And here we already have our account connected. And the tool description, you know what this is now. And then the resource is going to be a message. And this time the operation, instead of sending, we're actually going to try to get, and we'll just go with get many, right? And the limit here, again, we want it to be determined by the agent. So we're going to go ahead and say from AI and say message limit. And I'll go ahead and describe this as maximum number of messages. Once we have this set, we are pretty much ready. And the only thing I'll have to do now is actually send the email to myself so that we can recreate the example. But of course, notice that we are still using 3 of the components, right? And what we're going to try to do is recreate the scenario where we did not have RAG implemented and see the result. And then we're going to implement it and see the result with it, right? So I'm just going to go ahead and get the email ready. Or so we got the content and the subject ready. So I'm just going to send it off. All right, now let's go ahead and create a new session with the agent for readability. And let's tell it to fetch the last email in my inbox. Let's see what happens. The agent is working on that. It's fetching the data. And you can see that the last email in your inbox is from this person. And the subject is refund. And the snippet is, I would like to refund this item that I bought from your company 2 weeks ago, right? And if you remember in our example, we told it to respond to this email based on our company's policy, right? So I'm going to recreate that as well here. Respond to this email based on our company's policy. Let's see what the agent is going to respond to us with. All right, we just told it to respond to this email based on our company's policy, and my guy just hallucinated the response. Unfortunately, let's just see what happened anyway. All right, as you can see, it actually hallucinated the company policy, which is not what we wanted, of course. But we can actually fix this by telling it not to hallucinate or not to assume things and ask when it's unsure about something, right? Let's try to fix that by actually specifying it in the system message. Also, always make sure that you don't assume anything and that you ask when you are unsure about anything. And with this, let's actually try to do this again. I'm going to create a new session once more. Let's see what happens this time. All right, so we got the latest email, and I'm going to tell it to do the exact same thing again. And let's see what happens this time. All right, perfect. This time we can see that it didn't assume anything, but it actually referred to us for additional information. And here we can also see why it's super crucial to construct the right prompts. And you saw how we incrementally fixed all the problems we had, right? First of it was related to it not being able to get the right time. Second of it was using a placeholder instead of my name. The third one is this. And we fixed this by telling the agent to never assume things and to instead ask if it has anything that it is unsure of. All right, so with this, we just tested the scenario where just having these 3 components is not enough, right? And that is why we're going to be implementing the 4th component now and then retrying this exact same scenario again, see what happens then. But you might also be wondering, why don't we just add all these contextual information inside the memory, right? It's only natural that you think this way, but there are a few reasons why we don't do it like that. The first is the more data that a conversation history has, the more input token it generates, which leads to more cost. And remember that every time we send a request to an agent, what really happens is it resends the whole conversation history, right? So if you have a knowledge base of, let's say, 50,000 words, you would actually be sending 50,000 words worth of input tokens additionally to the agent, which would significantly increase the cost. And it's not just about cost, but it's also about redundancy, right? Obviously, cost is a big reason why we don't use it. Second biggest reason is because of redundancy. Imagine you have a knowledge base that, like I said, has 50,000 words and we are only interested in 500 of it. In that case, we would be having 49,500 words that is redundant, and that would actually lead to poor performance because the agent would then have to analyze through much larger amounts of data for no reason. So that is why just dumping everything into memory is not the right approach, and hence why we have this fourth component, which is RAG. So let's get that implemented into our agent. All right, so if you remember, for RAG, we'll have to have a vector database. And for that, we're actually going to be using Pinecone as a vector database provider. In this case, you'll have to create an account if you want to follow along. And I already have an account. So what I'm going to do right now is create something called index. It's basically creating a database. And I'm going to call this company information. And then I'm going to be choosing the embedding strategy, which was the process of converting data into its numerical representation called a vector, right? So I'm going to be picking this strategy here and go ahead and say click create index. Once we do that, we are actually going to have our essentially database ready, right? But of course, there are no records yet. So let's get to adding these records. So for the knowledge base, I actually asked ChatGPT to create one for me, and it actually did a great job. We are now Bright Wave Electronics, and we have some introduction data here and also some policy-based information. For instance, this refund and return policy, it says refunds are only allowed up to 1 week, which is what we're actually going to be using soon, right? And for adding the data into the vector database, I'm going to be creating a simple flow here just to not overcomplicate the agent we have here and to not deviate from the example we had in the previous section. So let's get to it. So to do this, I'm just going to disconnect this chat trigger from our agent for now. And then I'm going to go ahead and click on the plus sign and look for Pinecone. Okay. And once I click on this, I am going to click on add documents to vector store. And again, we'll have to connect to our account. And for that, let's click on create new credentials. And let's look at the docs on how we can actually get there. So we already have an account. The only thing we'll have to do is go to the API keys, right? And I can't see any hyperlink that's going to get us there, but no problem. Let's just go to the documentation. Sorry, let's just go to Pinecone, and we can see to the left here in the sidebar, the API key section. Now, once we get here, we'll just click on create API key, and I'll say video, and I'll create the key. Now I'll just go ahead and copy it. Once I copied it, I'll just attach it into the input field here and click on save. And now we are successfully connected with Pinecone. Boom, boom, boom. Alrighty. Now, yeah, we want to insert documents, right? And let's choose from the list we created, which is the company information. And there we go. Amazing. Alrighty. Now we have to pick the embedding and the document we want to add to it, right? Let me click on the embedding first. Let's pick OpenAI's embedding. Let's also pick the same one that we picked for our database when we were creating it, which was the ADA002, right? Now we have this. We are done with this part. And now let's click on the document. For this, we're just going to click on default data loader, and I'm just going to select JSON for the type of data, and then load all input. Load a space. We'll just load all input. It's not going to be important anyway. And then we'll go ahead and click on the text splitter. This is basically a strategy on how to split the text. So here it's recommended to select recursive character text splitter. Once we are done with that, we can just leave this as the default value. And now we have our uploader ready. And for this, I'm just going to go ahead and click on the chat button here. Remove this, refresh this. Just go ahead and copy this and then paste it to the chat window and click enter. Let's see what happens. You can see that it started processing already, and that's it. We can now check our vector database to see if the information is there yet. We can see it says no records yet, but I'm pretty sure it will be there now any moment. There you go. You can see all of the information that we added is now here, and now we have our knowledge base ready. The only thing that we'll have to do is basically connect our agent to it, right? So let's get to that without wasting any more time. I'm just going to delete this and then reattach the chat trigger to our agent. And then now let's go ahead and actually add the RAG layer into our agent, which we are going to be doing via the tool option again. I'm going to click on the plus sign here. Maybe just move this a bit. And I click on plus. And I'm going to say Pinecone Vector Store. This time I am going to... so we already have an account connected to this. Operation mode is retrieve documents. Get many insert. Yes, this is what we're looking for. And then example company knowledge base. Exactly, that's what it is. So I'm going to say get company knowledge. I'll just call it, actually, wait, no. A company knowledge base gets company's domain related data. And now we can select the Pinecone index, and the limit here refers to the number of matching records. You'll just keep it as the default for. And then now let's select the same embedding strategy. I'm gonna again click on OpenAI's ADA002, and with that we actually have this set, so we can start rocking this example as well. I'm gonna reset our message history and let's see what happens this time. Right, I will say fetch the latest message in my inbox. The agent starts doing its thing. It's going to Gmail, and it actually got, oh wait, I love, all right, so I basically just resent the email to myself, and I'm gonna try it again. Fetch the latest email in my inbox. Let's see what happens this time. Hello, what the frick? Bro, I swear I'm so unlucky, right? It's 5 p.m. right now. I'm not sure why I'm always getting these like promotional based emails, right? And currently it's 5 p.m. and look at this. I already have like what, 3 emails after 5 p.m., which is so dumb, but I'm just gonna go ahead and delete them, right? Hopefully this time it's gonna be fixed. So annoying, man. But yeah. All right, finally, yeah, the latest email in your inbox is from Mahmoud, blah blah blah. Refund, I would like to refund that I bought from your company 2 weeks ago. So now let's try this. Respond to this email based on the company's policy, but run it through me before sending it off. I'm telling it to run it through me so that we can see the control we actually have. I'm gonna send this off now. Let's see what happens. So see, now you can see it actually hit the Pine store, the vector database for the knowledge store. For the knowledge base. And this is the response it created. Thank you for reaching out to us regarding your refund request. According to our refund policy, refunds are eligible within 1 week, 7 days of purchase. So it was actually able to successfully get the relevant information, and based on that is able to create a response that we would have otherwise, right? And I'm sure these two here too was in the knowledge base, if I'm not mistaken. Let me just check it real quick. Be in its original condition, blah blah blah. Let's see. All right, so we can actually see that it says the items must be in its original condition, unused, and in its original packaging. Perfect. That's exactly what we have here and what we want, right? Include proof of purchase or verification purposes. Let's see. Include proof. All right, perfect. We also have this. So the agent was able to refer to our knowledge base and accordingly respond to the customer based on our company's policy, right? Perfect. So I'm going to say, perfect, send it off. I like how it even came out with Mamuka Smolo, Brightwave Electronics, which is pretty cool. So I'm just going to click send and let's see what happens. Now you can see it's processing. The email has been successfully sent to the recipient. Let's go check the email now. And we can see that we indeed did get the email and it's exactly the way we want it to be, right? So here we can actually see why having RAG is super powerful. Imagine if our knowledge base, for instance, was made out of 1 million words, we would still be able to get just the relevant information that we need, and we would have been able to respond to this email just like we did now without cluttering the message history. All right, before wrapping things up, let's just try one more example where this time the email is about a person trying to get a refund for what they bought just 3 days ago, just to see how our agent would respond to it this time. So for this, we'll have to resend an email. I'm going to create a new outbox or a new message. I'll call it refund 2.0 and say, perfect, and send it off. And now let's say, please fetch the latest email in my inbox. got the email, and let's say, please respond to this email based on our company's policy. This time I'm not going to tell it to go through me, to run through me, but just to send the email instead. You can see how it hit the knowledge base again, and then now you can see that it actually sent an email already, and finally it generated a response, and it's saying that it sent the email successfully. Let's go take a look. So we can see here that we actually did receive the email. This time we can see how it says, according to our refund policy, refunds are eligible if requested within 7 days of purchase, and the items must be in their original condition and packaging, right? Please confirm whether you meet the above conditions. So if so, you may do the following. So we can tell that the agent actually understands that the user purchased this 3 days ago, and it's just asking them to confirm whether or not they meet the other conditions above. All right, so that was RAG in action. I'm sure you can understand how important and useful it can be when it is integrated into an agent. And with that, we can now wrap up the whole video. In this video, we looked at what an agent is, what components they are made of, how they work together, and we actually built a few applications based on the examples we covered in section 1 and saw all the 4 components in action. All right, so we are at the end of the video. Thank you very much for watching it until the end. I hope you're able to get from it what it intended to give, which is the understanding of what agents are and how they work, and also the knowing that you don't really need any prior coding knowledge to actually start building your own agentic system that are actually useful and powerful. I would also like to let you know that I created a community on Skool.com, and as a way of showing courtesy for watching my first video until the end, I'm going to accept the first 50 people into the community for free, and after that I'm actually going to start making it a paid service. So the purpose of this community is going to be connecting with people who are looking for ways to integrate AI into their business workflows, or people who are looking for ways to actually provide these solutions as a service to businesses. And a part of that, of course, just a community where everybody helps each other. If anybody gets stuck in a problem, the others could help them, or if they have any questions, they could just freely ask and get it answered by other people in the community. And I'm also planning to host a few calls a week where we can share our experiences or ideas and just network in general and help each other grow. And if you're interested, definitely go join Business AI Alliance. The link will be in the description. And with that, thank you again for watching. Have a good day.